Good morning, everyone. Imagine you are standing on the dusty edge of two worlds, the worn-out habits of yesterday and the trembling possibility of something wholly new. We cling to the familiar, even as our soul whispers, change. In the heat of addiction or crisis, a crack appears, a fissure in the personality's granite. That crack is metanoia, a psychological rebirth. It beckons us to step into an unknowable landscape where old ways die and the daimon calls us into being. They say habits are merely repeated actions, patterns of behavior etched through time by force of will or conditioning. But this view is too thin, too rational. What if habit is not simply repetition, but revelation? Not a mechanism, but a mythology. The patterns we fall into are not just products of upbringing or choice. They are expressions of deeper presences, figures moving within us, directing our gaze, shaping our reflexes. Each habit carries a face, an image, a story. And when we speak of breaking a habit or changing a pattern, we are entering into confrontation with something ancient, something that does not easily yield. We like to believe that habit is ours, that it belongs to the ego, that with enough motivation, a new journal, a better calendar, we can steer ourselves elsewhere. But the soul does not work this way. The soul is not a bureaucrat of schedules. It is mythic, imaginal, attuned not to goals but to meanings. A habit is more like an internal god that has claimed residence, demanding repetition not as efficiency but as ritual. We eat in the same way, speak in the same tones, repeat the same arguments, not because we're lazy or forgetful, but because these habits serve something deeper in the psychic economy. They are symbolic acts in a theater we have forgotten we are in. Look closely at the man who paces the room when anxious, always turning 3 times before sitting. This is not random. This is choreography. Something in him performs a rite, the smoker's ritual, the flick of the lighter, the pause, the inhale, the exhale, is a liturgy to a hidden god, the same way the ancient priest lit incense. These repetitions are not errors to be corrected, but mysteries to be read. The soul does not stutter in meaningless action. Even the compulsions have syntax. When people speak of change, of wanting to become someone new, they usually mean getting rid of these old habits. But how can we discard something we have never understood? Transformation demands first that we listen to the image beneath the habit. What is it trying to enact? What shape of being does it serve? A man who is always late may be living under the god of delay, under the image of kairos, not chronos, his soul resisting the mechanical in favor of the opportune. A woman who eats in secret may not be indulging shame, but invoking a sanctuary, a moment of intimacy with herself, unsanctioned by the public gaze. These patterns have intelligence. They are not errors in the system, but expressions of longing. The task, then, is not behavior modification. That belongs to factories. The task is imaginal discernment. To ask of a habit, who are you? What myth do you perform? What longing lives inside your repetition? The alcoholic does not merely crave the chemical, but the forgetting, the dissolving of boundaries. Dionysus dances there, not just disease. To call it merely addiction is to pathologize what might be a sacred calling twisted by misdirection. Every vice is an image corrupted by being misunderstood. Habits resist change because they are not merely functions of will, but of archetypal allegiance. When we try to stop without first honoring, the soul rebels. Something in us knows it is being exiled without due ritual. This is why some patterns return even after years of abstinence. The image remains, searching for a new way to express itself. What is required is not suppression, but transformation through imagination. Can we find another image, another vessel for the same energy? Can the gambler become the poet of chance, the lover of fate rather than the destroyer of means? So often we speak of being stuck. What is stuck may not be the person but the image, frozen, misunderstood, forced to repeat the same gesture because we have not allowed it to evolve. The psyche holds on to form until meaning is metabolized. Only then will it release us. The repetition is not the prison. The lack of imagination is. To see habits as archetypal is to restore dignity to even our most frustrating patterns. It is to place them in the context of soul, to understand that what repeats in us may have its roots in the eternal, and once we grant them that reality, not as problems to fix but as figures to meet, we begin not with discipline but with reverence. We speak with the habit, we court it, we enter into dialogue, and only then, if it wills, it may release us, not because we overpowered it, but because we finally listened. There are moments when the direction of a life shifts, not gradually, not politely, but with force, with rupture, with the kind of inner violence that shatters the storyline we've been living. These are not the planned changes, not the New Year resolutions or tidy transitions, but the ones that arrive unannounced and without consent. A collapse, a betrayal, an illness, a breakdown. And in the midst of this psychic wreckage, something turns. Something begins that does not belong to the ego's agenda. This is not therapy. This is not improvement. This is metamorphosis, a turning of the soul, a metanoia. When this turning begins, it does not feel like growth. It feels like loss. What once held meaning empties out. What once made sense falls apart. Friends no longer understand. Work becomes absurd. The reflection in the mirror feels distant. It is as if the self has evacuated, and in its place, a great silence spreads through the inner corridors. This silence is not empty. It is full of presences, forgotten memories, unspoken desires, old voices rising up from below. The ground shifts, and the maps no longer guide. One is thrown into a wilderness, where language fails and familiar tools no longer work. This is not depression, though it may wear its costume. It is not pathology, though it mimics dysfunction. It is a soul event. The structures that once carried us no longer suffice because the psyche seeks another shape. The old personality, with its defenses, postures, and habitual claims, becomes too small for the life that wants to emerge. What had been concealed beneath the roles and strategies begins to stir, to rise, to demand, and it does not ask politely. It erupts. The soul is not interested in balance. It seeks depth, seeks truth, seeks its own authenticity, even at the cost of comfort. There is no script for this turning. No formula, no clear passage from one shore to another. It is not a straight line, but a spiral, often a descent. In the old initiatory rites, this was the moment of dismemberment, of being taken apart so that something more essential could be remembered. But the modern world has forgotten ritual, so the psyche must invent its own. It breaks down in bedrooms, in addictions, in solitude, in rage, in sleepless nights and sudden weeping. It speaks through panic attacks, through strange dreams, through the unbidden question, who am I, really? The radical turn is not toward a better self, but toward a deeper one. Not a higher version, but a more rooted truth. And this truth may be darker than we wished. It may not shine or inspire. It may unsettle. It may disturb the neat images we had of being good, of being successful, of being in control. The psyche does not care for those fantasies. It moves toward wholeness, which always includes the shadow, the wound, the forgotten child in the basement of memory. During this turning, one does not need answers. Answers are a form of escape. What is needed is presence, a willingness to feel what arises without naming it too quickly, a willingness to sit in the unraveling without stitching it closed, to let the tears come, to let the old voices speak, to let the forgotten parts of the self find breath. This is not healing as we usually understand it. It is not the restoration of what was. It is the birth of what has never yet been spoken. What turns is not just emotion, it is vision. The way we see the world, the way we understand time, the way we relate to death, to beauty, to failure. All of it turns. One becomes porous, more attuned to metaphor, to image, to the invisible threads that bind inner and outer. Life is no longer a project to manage, but a mystery to participate in. And this participation is not passive, it is imaginal. It means listening to symbols, responding to dreams, seeing meaning where once there was only routine. Eventually, if the turning is endured, something quieter comes. Not triumph, but clarity. Not certainty, but intimacy with one's depths. The personality that emerges from metanoia is less defended, more complex, more strange. It is not a return to normalcy. It is a new ecology of being, one shaped by descent and reformation. A life reorganized not around success, but around soul. And so the turning never truly ends. It deepens. It widens. It opens into a life less dictated by the outer noise and more attuned to the inner music. To have turned, truly turned, is to live differently. Not faster, not more efficiently, but more faithfully. Faithful to what calls from within, from the unseen, from the mysterious core that speaks not in commands but in symbols, in images, in the slow unfolding of the self that was waiting all along.
What if the mind is not an engine, not a processor, not a calculator bound to logic, but a poet, not metaphorically but essentially at its core structure and way of knowing? We have spent centuries reducing thought to data, soul to behavior, emotion to neurotransmission, but something is lost in this conversion. Something vital. We forget that mind dreams. It does not simply think, it imagines. Its motions are lyrical, symbolic, filled with gesture and resonance. When the mind speaks most authentically, it speaks in image. Language, when close to the soul, becomes metaphor. It bends toward ambiguity, toward rhythm, toward surprise. And this is not failure of clarity, it is precision of another kind. The soul does not clarify, it deepens. It curves around mystery rather than piercing through it. It sees through appearances, not by analysis, but by poetry. And this poetic seeing is not decoration, it is revelation. It is the mode by which Psyche reveals itself. When we say, I am drowning in sorrow, we do not mean it literally, but we also do not mean it falsely. We mean that sorrow has become an element, a sea, something immersive and overwhelming. That image is more accurate to the soul's experience than any diagnosis. The metaphor does not obscure the truth, it becomes its vehicle. The psyche lives in these metaphors, it moves through them the way a god moves through a myth. Yet, in our pursuit of utility and efficiency, we exile the poetic. We train children out of image, we demand facts, answers, categories. The subtle is dismissed as vague, the mysterious is labeled irrational. But what this exile has cost us is immense. We become strangers to our own experience. Our dreams become nonsense. Our symptoms, nuisances, our longings, chemical imbalances. But when the poetic is restored to the mind, meaning returns. Not because we solve life, but because we begin to read it differently. This kind of mind does not ask, what is this, but what does this resemble?
It seeks correspondences, echoes, analogies. It is drawn to the mythic, to the symbolic, to the layered, and in this way of seeing, even the mundane begins to shimmer. The coffee cup becomes an altar, the crack in the ceiling, a fault line in the cosmos, a stranger's glance, a visitation. The world becomes re-ensouled, not by fantasy, but by fidelity to the imaginal. Dreams, in this sense, are not idle distortions. They are poetry at its purest. The night mind returns us to the imaginal mode, weaving scenes that defy the rational but speak to the depths. The dream does not argue, it shows, it performs. Its logic is not linear but analogical. And this performance is not nonsense, it is psyche articulating itself in its native tongue. To reclaim the poetic basis of mind is to return to a deeper trust in the image, not as symbol to be decoded, but as presence to be dwelled with. The image does not point to something else. It is the thing. The snake in the dream is not fear or transformation or sexuality. It is snake, its movement, its gaze, its environment, all are part of the meaning. We must learn again to be with the image without stripping it of its skin. Psychological suffering often arises when the imaginal is denied. When the mind is cut off from its poetic roots, it becomes rigid, literal, dry. Anxiety becomes a problem to be eliminated, rather than a mood to be explored. Depression becomes a dysfunction, rather than a descent into soul depths. The image, if permitted to return, can reframe even the heaviest pain, not to dismiss it, but to give it context, shape, dignity. This way of being does not solve life, but it renders it meaningful. It allows sorrow to be companioned, not just medicated. It allows desire to be contemplated, not just gratified. It allows personality itself to be seen, not as fixed identity, but as a constellation of images dancing around a core mystery. The poetic basis of mind is not romanticism, it is precision of soul. It is the language closest to the way Psyche breathes. To think poetically is to live in dialogue with the invisible, to honor nuance, to trust ambiguity. And in doing so, we come closer to the texture of truth, not the truth that explains, but the one that evokes, that stirs, that invites us to see through. Let the mind be what it always was before the reduction. A poet, let it return to metaphor not as escape, but as homecoming. Let it remember how to see through symbol, through reverie, through depth. Let it speak again in images, for the image is soul's first speech. There is a confusion we carry, a subtle yet powerful displacement. We have come to believe the ego is the center of identity, the true self, the manager, the builder of our lives. We protect it, we defend it, we shape it carefully in the mirror of culture, but underneath this ego, often mistaken as the whole of ourselves, there is something older, more rooted, more fated, character. Character is not personality. It is not charm, not reputation, not the roles we play. It is deeper than persona. It is the particular shape of soul we were born with, the curve of our psychic backbone, the grain in the wood of our being. While the ego is adaptable, managerial, often inflated or deflated, depending on circumstance, character is consistent. It is quiet. It does not shout. It waits. It watches. It shows itself not through intention, but through style, how we walk through experience, how we suffer, how we fall in love, how we endure. The ego wants to succeed. It wants to be recognized. It wants to control. But character is indifferent to these ambitions. It is concerned with being true not to an idea of success, but to the inner pattern, to the image we carry within that never conforms neatly to the surrounding world. Character is the shape of our myth, the inner diamond pressing from within regardless of the ego's plans or preferences. This is why change, real change, is often so difficult, because the ego decides on a direction, a new career, a better habit, a resolution, but character may resist, not because it is lazy, but because it is loyal to a deeper rhythm. The ego says, "This is what I want," character whispers. But that is not who you are. And so without understanding this conflict, we blame ourselves. We call it self-sabotage, lack of willpower, fear of success. But often it is the voice of character refusing to be betrayed. When we speak of destiny, of calling, of fate, we are speaking the language of character. These are not ego goals. These are soul compulsions. They arise unbidden, like obsessions, like patterns repeating through decades. Character returns us again and again to certain places, certain themes, certain dramas, not to punish us, but to keep us aligned with our essential image. The tragedy is that our culture teaches us to mistrust character. We are told to reinvent ourselves, to brand ourselves, to market and optimize. The ego loves this language. It believes in forward motion, in self-improvement, in independence from history. But character does not move forward. It deepens. It does not forget. It remembers. It is ancestral, shaped by blood, dream, memory, and myth. It carries both wound and gift, and it will not be bypassed by positivity or productivity. Character cannot be faked. It has nothing to prove. It does not perform. It simply is. When you meet someone who is truly themselves, who has worn down the ego until it fits the shape of the soul, there is no need for charm. There is gravity, there is presence, something solid that cannot be taught, cannot be earned. It is not made. It is revealed, usually after great suffering. The crises we endure are often the soul's way of breaking the ego's illusion, of cracking its control so that character can come forth. What appears as failure is sometimes a correction. The ego collapses under what it cannot manage, and in that collapse, character steps forward, not triumphantly, but quietly, with a kind of honesty that makes no claims. This is why aging can be a gift, not for its wisdom, but for its erosion. The ego wears out. Its need to impress, to improve, to strive begins to fray. And in its place, character becomes visible. The person becomes who they always were, without apology, without disguise. This is not regression, it is revelation. A return not to simplicity, but to essence. And so the work is not to inflate the ego or to destroy it. The work is to temper it, to align it with character, to let the ego become the servant, not the master, to let the image we carry within shape the life we build without. This is not a goal to be achieved. It is a fidelity to be practiced, a listening, a remembering. Character does not speak in commands. It murmurs in dreams, in longings, in the repeated patterns that will not go away. It appears in the choices we make when no one is watching, in the way we carry our sorrow, in the way we care for what is broken. And when it begins to shape our life, there is no need to ask who we are. We are being who we were always meant to be. Loss is not the opposite of life. It is the condition for its unfolding. We move through a world where everything is vanishing, even as we hold it. Lovers, places, ideas, phases of the self. We are trained to escape this fact, to disguise it, to replace the lost with the new. But loss is not a detour. It is the atmosphere of the soul. And repetition, that most cursed of habits, the thing we're always told to escape, is not stagnation, but rhythm. The psyche repeats not because it forgets, but because it remembers too deeply. There is something in the soul that circles rather than climbs. It returns to the same images, the same wounds, the same patterns, not to torment us, but to invite us. Repetition is a calling. It is the symptom of something that wants to be heard in a deeper register. Yet we are taught to see it as failure, the same relationship that falls apart, the same shame that returns, the same sorrow that darkens even our happiest days. But repetition is not simply doing again. It is re-entering. And to re-enter something is to descend, not to regress. What repeats holds a message that has not yet been received. Loss teaches this. We do not lose once, we lose again and again. Even a single death is not singular. It echoes, it transforms its shape. First the body, then the voice, then the scent of a place, then the dreams. Each repetition reveals a new layer, another note in the soul's long song of attachment and letting go. The loss ripens as it is remembered. And remembering is never linear. It loops, it spirals, it deepens by returning. But we do not value depth. We value efficiency, resolution, progress. So we treat loss as a problem to be solved, and repetition as an error to be corrected. We speak of moving on, of breaking cycles, of reinventing the self, as if the soul were a business model in need of rebranding. Yet what if the movement the soul asks for is not forward but inward? Not up but down? What if embracing loss is the only way to truly inhabit life? There is a kind of sacred weight in what we cannot change, in the things that stay broken, in the memories that do not soften, not because we have failed to heal them, but because they are not meant to be healed in the way we think. They are meant to be companioned, tended, woven into our character. The repetition of grief does not mean we are stuck. It means we are faithful, faithful to what mattered, faithful to the shape the world took when it touched us. The soul repeats not out of dysfunction, but out of loyalty. There is wisdom in the circuit. The story told again and again is not the ego's obsession, it is the psyche's ritual. Repetition creates a container for transformation, like a chant, like prayer. The return to the same is what softens it, opens it, makes it bearable, makes it known, and slowly something shifts, not in content but in depth. The loss becomes less sharp, more spacious, still real but no longer needing to consume. It becomes part of the architecture of our being. To embrace loss and repetition is not to become passive. It is to become aware of the invisible design. It is to recognize that some things are not meant to be completed or escaped, but lived with. This does not mean despair. It means relationship, a willingness to sit with the unfinished, a reverence for the themes that shape us again and again. Some wounds are not meant to close. They are meant to become portals. They let the world in. They let the soul breathe. And they change us not by being fixed, but by being honored. Repetition becomes ritual, and ritual becomes meaning. In this way, we live in circles, not lines. We are not failed machines trying to optimize. We are mythic beings repeating sacred motifs. So let the losses return. Let the patterns rise again. Not to curse them, not to conquer them, but to ask, what image lives here? What desire is hidden in this sorrow? What story is asking to be remembered again? The soul does not fear repetition, it moves to its rhythm, and what is repeated faithfully may, at last, reveal the shape of what we truly are. Let us then treat our crises not as failures to control, but as sacred invitations to rebirth. Let the world crack you wide. In that fracture, the new self is called. The diamond hums beneath the debris of who you thought you were. and steps forth archetypal, imaginal, alive. May your soul never find false security in sameness. May your metamorphosis be as wild, strange, and beautiful as the myths that first shaped you. Thank you.